Good evening. A few people came in the back door and maybe didn't sign in. If you're one of them, we'd like to have your name and address. My name is Jan Hoem, and it's so good to see all of you here this evening. It's really a pleasure to bring Eben Fodor to Missoula and to be here to speak with you. Before he steps up, I want to thank the many people and groups who helped bring Eben Fodor here, to the neighborhoods and generous people who gave of time and money, including the community forum, those on the grant selection committee, and especially the neighborhood councils from Rose Park, the Upper Rattlesnake, Lower Rattlesnake, Grant Creek, the university area, and Moose Can Gully. Over half of the cost of this evening was met by them. Joe Glassy, Carol Elson, my husband Harold, they all helped a lot. Ron Scholl is in the back. He's from MCAT running the projector. And, Maxine Lane is somewhere, and she will be over here selling books at the end of the evening. The Office of Neighborhoods and Lynette Diaz and Ginny Miriam helped in many ways. So, talking to Eben Fodor makes me feel like everything can turn out right. We're all in new territory these days, with population increasing rapidly and less land available for development. Mr. Fodor has looked at these things that we're concerned about, and he can help us understand where our uneasiness about losing our quality of life comes from. He believes people can do things to enhance their communities and make them better places to live. I am certain that everyone in this room hopes that 20 or 50 years from now, Missoula will still generate the same love of place that we feel today. With that in mind, sit back, relax, and listen for the ideas that Eben Fodor brings to our growth discussion. Eben?
Well, thanks a lot, and thank you very much, Jan, for all the organizing and the many people that you brought together to make this happen, and thanks to Harold for a wonderful tour around the city. This is my first time speaking in Montana, and actually my first time in Missoula, and I have to say I'm quite impressed. I get called on to speak in a lot of small, beautiful communities, where I think people can especially appreciate the impacts that growth is having and recognize that there are consequences and that may end up ultimately harming the things that they value most about their community. So it's places like Missoula that have the level of interest and citizen involvement that makes things like this possible. But I think of the many communities I've been to, all of them really have something special to protect. But I have to say Missoula is certainly one of the finest places that I've been. So you've got an outstanding city, and I think everyone here knows it. Getting on the airplane to come here from Eugene, I chatted with an elderly couple, and ultimately they had to ask me, what do you do? And I said, I'm an urban planner, I work on urban growth management, gave them the boilerplate answer. They said, oh, well, I don't know if you're the kind we like or not. Well, they're from Seattle, so I'm thinking, I said, well, I help communities deal with growth issues and work on growth management. And she says, well, maybe you're the kind that we like then. So apparently planners in Seattle have been generating some enemies. So I'm going to talk a little bit about planning. I've been an advocate of planning all my life, but I see it having some serious problems, really struggling to gain a public acceptance, and I think there's some reasons why that is the case, so I'll talk about some of those tonight. So I'll go ahead and get started here with some slides I have, and I really want to try to keep my talk to about an hour and 15 minutes. We've got more time than that. We can have questions or comments would be welcome afterwards, so we can make a little bit of a forum to round out the time. But I don't want to spend too much time here, but there are a few things that I want to cover, and there's an outline for my talk tonight. some of you had a chance to study it earlier. I noticed a slide popped on by accident, so hopefully you're well ahead of the crowd. Really, this is a slide done by a colleague of mine, and I think what it illustrates more than anything is the complexity of urban growth. And I think it's one of the mistakes that we make as citizens often is to oversimplify it or to assume that it's a simple issue and that there's going to be some clear-cut black and white types of solutions. I think the other thing is the other mistake that you might make is to think that it's a relatively small little topic. There's all these other topics, but urban growth is this little topic. Actually, it's a really big topic. So that's a challenge for me every time I come to talk to people because I really want to talk about a broad range of issues, and it's quite a challenge to do that in a very limited period of time. So basically, I have to constantly cut things out of my presentation and make it a reasonable type of thing. And so here's what I'd like to try to tackle tonight. I may have to skip over a few things to move it through and make sure that I do cover the key points. But I want to start off by talking about our changing American landscape. And one of the reasons I want to do this is because it's really what motivates me personally in this area, is the amount of change that I've seen. I'm 52 years old, and I personally have witnessed more change in the American landscape than occurred in all previous history in my lifetime. That's a phenomenal amount of change. And any of you that are in your late 40s or older have witnessed more change yourselves than occurred in all previous history in the United States. So the pace is dramatic and the pace is increasing. So I want to talk about that a little bit because it impacts everybody everywhere in the United States. 12 myths of growth are some of the common, I call it growth mythology, that you'll run up against constantly if you're active in this area. And so I want to introduce you to that. The cost of growth is one of the myths, and so I'll talk a little bit more about the costs that we face with urban growth, because typically the growth issue comes with a bunch of benefits, and that's what we hear about. That's all the information that the citizens generally get are about the benefits of growth, and they very rarely get shortchanged on the other side, and there are quite a few things on the other side, so I want to talk about those. Relationship between jobs and growth is important and thoroughly misunderstood relationship. And then surveys on growth, I think it's important to see what people actually think about growth, and statistically valid random sample surveys are a great way to probe and to see what people actually think about some of these issues. And a really useful tool, but I may have to skip through a few of those. Politics of growth, if you're going to be active in growth issues, if you're going to seek changes, reforms at the local level, the politics of growth is a very important thing to understand, and I think one of the key hurdles that we face in having real meaningful reforms that reflect the public interest and public values. And better planning for better communities, I alluded to that earlier. We've got some changes to make, I think, in the planning process. And I'll suggest a few potential action items. So you can barely see this on the screen. We have to keep the lights up because it's an all or nothing proposition in here. So, but this is a slide of the night sky seen from space, of Earth seen from space with night lights. And I think it illustrates visually, the amount of development that we have. And you can probably make out, Europe setting over here on the other side, and you can see the Hawaiian Islands over here, and you can see what a great deal of light is produced here. And I've become much more aware of this since I, got a telescope a few years ago and started looking up at the sky and realizing that there's a lot of light pollution out there. And even in Eugene, Oregon, now we have to drive over an hour to get to an actual dark sky site. So these people over here, I suspect, are really, there is no dark sky site. There's nothing that's truly dark. And I think probably one of the things you have here is access to dark skies, and that's a real asset, at least for some of us. But I think there's generations of kids growing up that have never seen a night sky. And that's quite remarkable to me because I take it for granted. I grew up with dark skies. And I know what they look like. And if you've never seen it, you won't know what you're missing, I guess. Like a number of things, like the changing landscape. So that landscape is being impacted by about $500 billion a year in construction spending, We build 10,000 miles of road every year and over 1 million single-family homes. This is the land area converted to development from other purposes to develop land in the United States. And it's part of the natural resources inventory that's done by the federal government. And I should say in past tense, that was done by the federal government, because this resource inventory was the best inventory done of our land base. I mean, how important is our land base? To me, it's important. And yet, we now have stopped gathering this high quality data. And so there should be, we have this period here from 82, 10 years, 82 to 92, and then 92 to 97, and this was done in 2000. So we should have had at least one more block, if not two more blocks here of data showing us how we were impacting our land base, but we don't have it anymore. It was not completely defunded, but funded to the extent that they can no longer produce the high quality data. Yet this is still the best data we have available. And what I want to show you in a few other slides is that the 2.2 million acres a year that we're developing of land is undoubtedly significantly higher, because what happened after 1997 is record growth, all-time record growth. So, but let me just, working on this older figure here, just show you what the implications are for that growth rate. So at the pace of development from 92 to 97, we developed 2.2 million acres a year, which would be equivalent to an area the size of the state of Indiana every 10 years. And I finally had the chance to speak in Indiana last year. They go, yeah, we know how big Indiana is. It's big. But perhaps you've been to Maine or South Carolina, comparably large states. It's a very significant amount of land area that we're converting from some other purpose to a developed purpose. About 40% of that land, or about 1 million acres a year, is farmland. And this developed land area is growing at 2.5% a year. So that might sound kind of underwhelming initially, until you realize what the doubling time is associated with that. And at 2.5% a year, the developed land area in the United States will double in 28 years. So to me, that's startling, phenomenal information, and yet we're growing at a pace faster than this data shows. So the doubling time would be even less than 28 years. So in a generation, each generation, at the pace that we have been growing, we would see a doubling of the amount of developed land in the United States. It's just a phenomenal figure. I personally don't believe we can sustain that level of development. And I think partly what we're seeing in terms of the real estate corrections is partly a response to that. It's just unbelievable to think that we could even fund the amount of concrete, steel, and energy that would be required to double the infrastructure that we have in place today. But that's the pace, that's the road that we're on at this point. So we've grown even faster since. And here's some of the data just to show you that we have grown faster, and I think probably a lot of you are familiar with this, but 1997 is when the data ends, and here are our house sales since. And you can see we set a record in 98, most houses sold ever, and we broke that record for the subsequent 6 or 7 years, and we're on a bit of a correction here down on the downside, so that's probably a good thing in many respects anyway. But clearly we were growing faster at the end of this data. The last 10 years have been very, very fast growth. In terms of the amount of land area that we used for that development, lot sizes did get a little smaller, but because of the rate of development, we're still using more land per year than we've used in the past over the last 8 years. And here's one of the charts that this National Resources Inventory generated. So they did some really top quality work. This is a lovely graphic that shows how where developed land came from, and the pie charts give you a relative indicator of how much land was developed in each state. So you can start with the nation as a whole over here and see that about 25% was cropland, 17% pasture, 11% range, 43% forest, and other category. And you can see the tremendous amount of growth on the eastern seaboard here. and a lot in Texas, a lot of development in California. And Montana, is relatively small, but, that really reflects the small population base. You still had a fairly high rate of growth. And you can barely see the data here, but about 30% of the developed land in Montana was cropland. So the largest category that development land was cropland previously, and the second largest category is rangeland. So rangeland and cropland are largely what was being developed in the state, and probably still is. So just to show you, I've heard it said that there's more farmland today than ever before. And in fact, I heard the president of the Home Builders Association, National Home Builders Association, say it about 5 years ago. There's more farmland than ever before. So don't worry. And so I'm not sure what data source he's looking at, but this is the best data available. And you can see that, first of all, the number of farms declined, even though they did try to boost it here by adding some very small marginal type farming operations like maple syrup farms. So they pumped it up a little bit, but it had really no impact on the land area. So we start here. This is, let's see, we're looking 97 to 2006. We had about a billion acres, and it's been steadily declining. It doesn't look too impressive, except there's another phenomenon that's happening, and that's population steadily increasing. Steadily declining farmland, steadily increasing population, and if you compare the two, you can get farmland per capita in the United States. So this is what, for what I was able to get data for the last 19 years, we've seen farmland per capita go from 4.1 acres to 3.1 acres. Every one of you lost an acre in the last 19 years. A whole acre. So this is a very significant phenomenon. The other thing that happened in 2005 here, food-wise, does anybody know about something that happened in 2005 in relationship to food? The United States became a net food importer. Boy, it was news in some areas, but kind of just a little bloop, and then we were on to something else. We were the breadbasket for the world when I grew up. That was what we learned in geography class. Now we're a net food importer. So the idea that we have this endless supply of land, and who really cares, and why are you being a worrywart, is really starting to catch up with us. And I think we're at the point now where we're going to see symptoms of a farmland crisis and a food supply problem. We could have a drought, a major drought, in a major agricultural producing area, and we could have food rationing in the United States. Unbelievable? This kind of thing has happened in the past. And so I think we're really pushing the envelope in terms of our land supply and agriculture. So I wanted to just make that point. This is a scene that I see all over America, which is the once prosperous farm sitting on Class 1 farm soils. This happens to be Eastern Shore where I was speaking about 3 years ago, and you see the encroachment of the subdivision in the background. And these soils could produce anything they wanted to. They could produce tomatoes, they could produce corn, you name it, they can grow it, and instead they're growing houses. And I just happened to be back there last year and get the same shot as they had just torn down the barn to get ready for the next line of, but this is all across America we're seeing this. This is the predominant scene that I see, and it's this changing landscape. I only wanted just to show the first line here really, which is just to mention that 99% of the world's food supply comes from land. We still got to have land to produce food. We can't make it in factories. Even though it may taste like it's made in a factory, it requires land. And we're only getting 1% from aquatic sources, and we're overtaxing the oceans as it is. So we're very dependent on that. Impervious surface area. This is data that was developed in 2004 by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. First time ever looking at impervious surface data from Landsat satellites, in which they actually generate a visual representation of impervious surface. So we're not looking at something abstract like city lights or from space, but we're actually looking at impervious surface. In order to make it visible, the red is 50% or greater impervious surface area, and then declining percentages down to light 0% impervious surface, so you can visually see it. Well, the other thing that's neat about digital data is that you can just take it all and add it right up. And so they add up all the impervious surface area, and it equals this over here, 112,000 square kilometers of impervious surface in the United States. So what is that like exactly? Well, over here is Ohio. It's about the size of the state of Ohio. So that represents a land area that is actually, in fact, paved or has an impervious surface on it like a house. It would include streets, sidewalks, the house itself, but not the front yard or the backyard. So that's the kind of data this is. And so it just, again, illustrates that it's not an insignificant impact that we're having. All right, I want to change gears a little bit and talk about what I'm coining urban legends or urban growth mythology. And I really just want to introduce these to you and talk about a couple of them. But here's my short list from the book, the top 12 urban growth myths. And I'll just read through these and talk about a couple of them in more detail. But number one, growth provides needed tax revenues. We have to grow to provide jobs for people. We have to stimulate and subsidize growth to have good jobs. If we try to limit growth, housing prices will shoot up. Environmental protection hurts the economy. Growth is inevitable. If you don't like growth, you're an anti. People don't support growth management. We have to grow or we'll die. Vacant or undeveloped land is just going to waste. And a person's visual preference is no basis for objecting to a development. And community activists, just another special interest group. And there is no such thing as a public interest. So those are some of the primary myths that I see perpetuated at civic type things. And so I go into some detail in the book, but I want to just talk about a couple of them. I'll talk about myth 1, about the taxes, 2, about jobs, 6, about growth being inevitable, and 8, about people supporting growth management. So myth 1, growth provides needed tax revenues. My reality check, growth tends to raise taxes. Complete opposite. The direct and indirect costs of urban growth place new demands on local resources, divert money away from other important public services. That's the scenario. It's not particularly controversial. I mean, in the sense that the data and the evidence are fairly clear. This is a nice graphic that I like because it shows this developer proposing his office building or whatever commercial development and talking about all the benefits. And it's got the astute planning board with little thought bubbles thinking about all the costs. And you might hope this happens, but it probably rarely does in reality. Anyway, they're thinking about the schools and the traffic and the police and the fire trucks and the sewer mains that are going to be required associated with this development. If I summarize the literature, I've read everything that I can find on this topic. There's some excellent studies. And if I summarize those, I get a number of conclusions. One is that population growth tends to increase the residential tax burden. So if you look at areas that have population growth, taxes are going up. And areas with the most rapid growth have the greatest tax increases. And fast-growing areas that don't increase taxes will tend to see some other consequence, typically a reduction in public services. And bigger cities tend to have higher taxes than smaller cities. So absolutely none of these would lead you to think that growth would be a tax bonanza of some sort. Yet this is presented to the public all the time, that you're going to generate tax revenues. So why would those conclusions occur? I think that it's largely a result of the costs, particularly the infrastructure costs associated with urban growth. So I've put together this kind of summary cost list of the cost side of the growth equation. And over on the right side, I've got the environmental and other costs because I didn't want to leave them out, but they're not well quantified in terms of an economic value. So I have focused my work on the capital costs associated with building the public infrastructure and facilities associated with supporting urban growth. And it's a long list of facilities, and it's readily possible to calculate these costs. And really, about 20 years ago, absolutely no one was doing this. And 15 years ago, almost no one was doing it. And it's really catching on over the last 10 years all around the country that more and more cities are acknowledging these costs and starting to charge fees to try to offset them, because otherwise they end up in the tax base. Let me give you a list in a slightly different format here. Here are the 12 basic categories of infrastructure required by urban development. So first of all, there's not just 1, 2, or 3 categories, there's 12 of them. And the most expensive ones, school facilities, big dollars. Transportation system, also big dollars. And you can see sewer, also potentially big dollars. And you get down here, you know, there's some areas that we really don't know much about. There hasn't been a lot of study. They haven't been well quantified. Open space in particular can be highly variable. So that's the picture of infrastructure costs. And if you total them up for a single family house, the costs will range somewhere in the $25,000 to $90,000 per house cost. And these are costs that really have to be paid as soon as the house is open for business or occupied, because you got to be able to flush that toilet, and there needs to be sewer plant capacity. There are going to be kids that have to go to school, and there have to be places for them to sit. Mom and dad need to go to work, and there needs to be a road that gets them to work. So all this infrastructure has to be paid when the house is completed. And so what the cities are doing more and more, Missoula does charge impact fees for some of those areas that you saw, is to charge a development impact fee for various categories of infrastructure. And I know the state has recently enacted an enabling legislation to specifically allow cities to do that. So that's a nice thing that simplifies and streamlines the process quite a bit. But in the case of Missoula, I think the total impact fees for a single family house are about $2,500. And as you can see, even on the low end, the cost is $25,000. So about 10% of that cost is being recovered. And I'm not sure why that is exactly. I haven't really had the opportunity to look into it, but I did note that in Bozeman they're charging $7,000. So and at least in one other town they're over $7,000 in fees. So you may have some opportunity to start recovering some more of those costs. When I first started doing this work, I looked at that cost and I thought, well, that is a huge cost, because that basically gets paid from the public sector somehow. And that somehow is through taxpayers. So if you don't have a specific fee to recover it from the development directly, then it gets distributed across the public at large and everyone pays. So every time there's a new development, every time a new school is needed, every time a new fire station is needed, everyone pays. And if you've already paid and you've lived in the community a long time, you're still asked to pay. And you'll be asked to pay again and again. And so it results in a real inequitable situation. But if I take a scenario, let me just take a midpoint there, just for an example, and say it costs $50,000 in public infrastructure to serve a new single-family house. And if the land is being developed at 4 houses per acre, then the per acre cost would be 4 times $50,000 or $200,000. So the public sector cost would be $200,000 an acre to allow that land to be developed. And a light goes off in my head and says, maybe this city could buy the land and save the taxpayers money, right? If you could buy the land for less than $200,000 an acre, you could actually result in a net savings, and you'd have parkland or open space. So that, in fact, is the case. And, of course, it depends on circumstances. It depends on where you are in that cost spectrum, and it depends on the cost of the land. So typically, downtown land is usually too expensive, so that is not something that typically works out very well. But most cities have land that can be purchased more cheaply than to allow it to be developed and pay these kinds of costs. So I did, in fact, find a number of cities that have done exactly this sort of thing. This is a list that cities that I've identified that have conducted studies that looked at the cost of development and compared it with the cost of land conservation. Now, you don't have to buy the land outright. You can purchase a conservation easement from a farmer, buy their development right, compensate them, and they can continue farming in perpetuity, and the community can have open space plus agriculture. So purchasing the land isn't necessary. And Pittsford, New York is an excellent case study, so if this is something of interest to you, go to Pittsford, New York website and check it out. They've recently revised their website, so you may have to hunt a bit, but it used to be the featured front page of their website because they were so proud of it. They did the analysis. They determined that they could protect 80% of the farmland surrounding this rural community permanently and save taxpayers a significant amount of money. So they said, they put it to the taxpayers and said, would you like us to do this? And the taxpayers said, uh-huh. And so they did it, and so now the land is permanently protected and Pittsford is a permanently rural community. So a nice success story. Just to mention here, as I move on, this on the growth, cost of growth topic, there are 5 different ways to pay for growth, so it's not always, you're not always going to see it in higher taxes. You could see it in increased debt. You could see it in infrastructure deficit. This is where you don't build the infrastructure you need to. Schools become overcrowded, roads become congested, etc. Deferred facility maintenance, that's where you run out, your money's being diverted to pay for growth, and so you don't fix things anymore. Public facilities run down. Reduction in public services, library hours are reduced, street cleaning's reduced, snow removal's eliminated. So there are other ways of paying for it. There are also patterns of sprawl subsidy, and as I kind of alluded to, old subsidizes new. So existing neighborhoods subsidize new neighborhoods. Urban subsidizes rural, and low mileage drivers subsidize high mileage drivers. So these are 3 types of subsidies that basically foster and encourage sprawl. Now, I had a wonderful opportunity to work on to basically develop create a development impact model for the city of San Diego. And when I first started doing this project, I wasn't sure how complex it would be, but it turned out to be a perfectly manageable project, even though I was working with the city of San Diego and all their complex budgeting processes. And so in about 3 months, I was able to produce a model that could very quickly calculate the costs of new development. And this model is set up to calculate the costs of any type of development, residential, commercial, industrial, of any type, any combination, and any size, and I can do it in 15 minutes. Okay? So the great mystery has now been solved. Now a city can run this model and in 15 minutes have a close approximation to the total cost that it's going to pose on the community. Once this was completed, we did some testing, and we ran a few examples, and one of them was this University Town Center here. And so this is part of the model I've just clipped out. The University Town Center was a regional shopping center in San Diego. That they proposed to redevelop. And just to give you an idea of what goes on in San Diego, it's currently a 1 million square foot shopping center. That's a big shopping center. So they have big shopping centers in San Diego. But it wasn't big enough. They wanted to add 750,000 more square feet to the shopping center and 250 multifamily residential units to it. So that's the proposed project. And the interesting thing is the model also calculates the impact fees that will be paid. So very quickly, it calculates what the projected payments are going to be, because as you can imagine, San Diego has seen a lot of growth. Okay, there's hardly any place that you can think of that's seen more growth than San Diego. Constant, steady growth pressure, and so they develop funding mechanisms to try to pay for these things, and so they have a complex system of impact fees, and for this project they would collect $24 million. So that sounds like a very ample and adequate amount of fees to be collecting, and I think that without any further knowledge, citizens would be very pleased with their city for collecting $24 million. So here's the final results of running the model, and just to make it clear what we're doing here, we're only looking at 4 categories in this model because that's really all that they wanted to look at. That's all I was asked to look at. And there are other categories that I would have looked at to get a fuller picture of the impacts. But just looking at parks and recreation, police facilities, fire and rescue, and transportation facilities, here's the numbers that we generate. So for the residential component, remember I said there are 250 multifamily units. Residential component, you can see there's about a $2 million cost associated with parks and rec, and about $3 million associated with transportation, for a total of around $5 million in costs. And then for the in the commercial industrial category is basically the retail center. And we attribute no parks and rec costs to commercial. We typically attribute it all to residential. It's just one of the practices. And a relatively modest cost for police and for fire. And then a very large cost associated with all the traffic that will be generated of $28 million. And so we add the $5 million residential plus the $29 million, and the total is $34 million in cost. And we subtract the city's impact fees that they'll collect, and there's a $10 million shortfall. And the city of San Diego is suffering. Let me tell you, they have serious financial problems. They're constantly struggling. And you wonder why? Because $10 million just slipped under the radar. This project has been approved already. And so, sight unseen, without the awareness of city officials or the public, a $10 million bill got slipped into the San Diego taxpayers. Or it manifests itself as a deficit in some form. So, this kind of modeling can help you make you aware of what the real costs are and where the shortfalls are. So I think with this kind of knowledge, if I were a San Diego city councilor, I would say we need to step back from this project and renegotiate something, because we're not ready to subsidize you to the tune of $10 million to get a shopping mall expansion. So I think there's a lot of opportunity with this kind of thing, and I think it's clear now it can be done. It can be done for any city. So something to think about. We have to grow to provide jobs for people in the community. This is a very common reason, basis for continuing growth or for enduring more growth that you may or may not want. And my reality check is that we really can't grow our way out of local unemployment problems. Growth just makes the problem bigger. And initially that may not, may not be clear, and it's not necessarily a simple relationship, but I'll give you a little bit of information that I think might help understand the relationship. So I want to focus on jobs and growth, and what is the connection between jobs and growth exactly. This chart is not as complex as it looks. It was produced by the Puget Sound Regional Planning Council, and is one of these rare opportunities where you get this kind of quality data, where you can visually see what's going on. But basically what we've got here is total population increasing in the solid line for the Puget Sound region, which is around Seattle. Okay, an area that's seen a lot of growth. And then we see down here total employment, or jobs. So they're both steadily increasing as the region becomes bigger from 1961 to 1998. And superimposed on that are the annual variations in employment and population. So employment's in red, population is in black. So the reason I'm showing this to you is because you can see a direct relationship between jobs. As employment goes up, population tends to go up. And as employment drops, we see population drop. And as employment goes back up again, we see population going up. And then as employment drops again, you notice that the population is lagging employment. So here we see a peak, a valley, excuse me, and we see population lagging it by about a year or so. Maybe it's a little more than a year. So you lose a bunch of jobs, people start moving out. You gain a bunch of jobs, people move back in. Lose some jobs, people leave. Gain some jobs, people come back. Lose some jobs, people leave. So you can see it. There's a very clear relationship. And jobs, people move for various reasons, but jobs is number one. So there are many reasons that people move, but jobs is probably the most important. So you have a relationship that is so strong that it's almost possible to say jobs equals growth. And so the next time that there's some big jobs proposal, something that's going to create a lot of jobs in Missoula, just a little light go off and say, does that mean that a lot of people are going to move into town to snap up those jobs? And studies show that yes, in fact, that's the case. And that after a period of time, almost all of those jobs end up going to someone who did not live in that community before. If you have a good job, it's going to be available to anyone in the United States of America. And it's likely going to go to the most qualified person. And statistically, that qualified person is going to live somewhere besides your town. And so you're going to generate growth into the town. And sometimes there's going to be a lag. So there may be a brief period, if you create a tremendous amount of jobs, there may be a brief period of employment boost, which will then, people will move in until those jobs are absorbed and your unemployment rate is right back to where it was previously, and now you have a larger population with the same unemployment rate you had before. So part of that is that we've got essentially a national job market. It's not a local job market, and I think when communities try to treat their job market as a local one, they run into this kind of a problem. I call it the catch-22 of growth, and it applies to a lot of things besides jobs, but the way that it works is the better you make your community, whether it's jobs, good schools, affordable housing, great quality of life, the better you make your community, the more people want to live there, and they'll keep moving there until it's no better than any other community. It's the great equalizing force. It's just a basic phenomenon, and it's something that we need to recognize when we're working on urban growth issues, because there are going to be some issues that we're not going to be able to solve at a local level because they're really national. And efforts to solve them are just going to simply be overrun. So it's important to keep this in mind when you're working on these issues. The last thing on the jobs growth relationship I want to mention is this analysis. First time this has ever been done. So in spite of all the rhetoric that you hear about jobs and growth, how we have to grow to get jobs, and that's going to be great for us, and that's the only way we're going to prosper. All that was based on what exactly? Where was the data that supported that? Well, here is some actual data looking at that very issue. And this researcher looked at the 100 largest U.S. metropolitan areas and simply plotted the relationship between growth and income. So here we have on the horizontal axis, we have annualized percentage change in population growth from 1990 to 98. And that's the way to look, best way to look at growth. Percent per year growth in population. So population growth rate. On this side, we have annual percent change in real per capita income. So, and so this is zero growth and zero change in income. And what we see here is that these 100 cities are kind of lumped in this area here with some outliers, like Las Vegas has had a tremendous amount of growth, fastest growing place in the nation for the last couple of decades. Tremendous amount of growth. And yet the income is really on par with communities that have had very little growth, and really even close to communities that have had negative growth are still having income gains on par with Las Vegas. So all that tremendous amount of growth that they had did not produce significant benefits. Austin, is an outlier that has had success and population growth. Now, if there were a relationship between growth and income, in other words, population growth was producing, money in your wallet, benefits to the public, increased incomes, which is what we're promised, then as population growth increased, this would increase, and we'd see a line that was straight up in this direction like this. So that would be a correlation showing that population growth helped per capita income. And if you squint at that data, you might correlate that to a line going up in that direction. You might see, that's possible, I could fit a line in that direction. But if I tell you then that absolutely no correlation between population and income would be this line, straight across here. And I think if you squint, you can look at this data, you could say, yeah, I could see that being a fit. And the bottom line is that there is no statistical correlation between these two. Okay? There is no statistical correlation between population growth rate and income levels. Okay, growth is inevitable. You can't stop growth. Growth management doesn't work, and therefore we have no choice. So my response, there are actually many ways to slow growth. And one of the ways to do it is to start addressing subsidies that are encouraging and inducing growth. You can adopt standards for growth. You can establish limits to the rate of growth in your community. So clearly there are things you can do. The issue of growth management, I think I want to try to portray it to you tonight as a spectrum, because typically this is portrayed as two sides. And I want to illustrate the idea of a spectrum. So over on this side, we have encourage and subsidize growth, and over on this side, we have stopping all growth immediately. Okay? And so what I see in communities all across the country is this is portrayed as the only two possible scenarios. And so citizens are either loving it or they're hating it. And there's just nothing else. And I think that's a pretty unrealistic portrayal. And so I put some other points on this spectrum. 2 would be growth accommodation, essentially having policy of accommodating growth, planning for it, laying out streets for it, providing land for it. And 3 would be more shaping and directing growth in some way. 4 is kind of an abstract concept that I put in there as sort of a placeholder, but it's adopting growth neutral policies. And the concept there is that your policies are not either encouraging growth or discouraging growth. They're completely neutral. And perhaps that should go in the middle, of the spectrum, but I put it here. 5 would be adopting policies that would slow, moderate, or temper growth in some way. And 6 would be stopping growth. So if you look at a spectrum like that, I think it's a much different proposition. And so I pose a couple questions. First, where are public policies today on this spectrum? And I clearly see public policies being right here. Essentially, cities throughout the nation are seeking every bit of growth that they can possibly get. They want pedal to the metal growth. Give us all we can get. And, where does something like smart growth fit in on this scale? Well, I would say it's about here. It's shaping and directing growth. And where is the public sentiment? We don't really know what the national public sentiment is because there hasn't been a survey that I know of that really asks people. But I've looked at a lot of local surveys and regional surveys and state surveys, and I would say that for most part the public is about here. They really would like to see the pace of growth slowed. And the range probably goes from being more or less growth neutral to wanting to stop growth. And so I think the public generally fits in here. So public policies are right here. Smart growth is about here, and public sentiment, in my impression, is there. So people don't really support growth management. It's just some vocal minority. And really a majority of the public recognizes the importance of environmental protection and the need to manage growth. The way that I would look at that is through survey results. And I'm going to go through these fairly briskly, I think. I did put some local results in here. First one I wanted to show you was a national survey that I picked up last year, which was quite impressive. And in terms of the kind of findings that they have, because sometimes what people think is much different than what we're told they think. But do you personally think protecting the environment conflicts with economic growth? Whether or not you personally think protecting the environment conflicts with economic growth. If there is a conflict, which should take priority, protecting the environment or economic growth? I was really amazed when I saw this, that 60% felt that protecting the environment should take precedent when there's a conflict between the two. So quite different than you might be told. It's typically, we've got to achieve balance between these two, and it's going to be somewhere in the middle. We're going to have to slice and dice the environment. But clearly the public has a strong bent on this. There's some studies from Montana, and I think I'm going to skip those and go to Missoula. Citizen survey that was done a couple years ago, and 404 in-depth phone interviews. One of the findings, 93% of Missoulians agree that Missoula is a good place to live. They didn't ask if you think it's a great place to live. But nonetheless, 93% think it's a good place to live, and that's a pretty impressive statistic. So I haven't seen that higher percentage anywhere around the country, and I think it's indicative people valuing the place and recognizing that it's a special place. So that was impressive. The city ranked pretty darn well for most of the services that it provides, and the areas that it did fare poorly on were growth-related areas. And they had to do with reducing traffic congestion. That was where it rated the worst in the survey. Planning for growth, second worst. Keeping taxes low, third. And housing affordability for average families. And I think the city has perhaps tried to respond to this, because I noticed you got a number of major planning initiatives in the works, and so I think perhaps that's partly a response to the survey, you might hope, anyway. Most important issue that the city government should be working to solve, and the top rated issue is growth management. Traffic congestion, second. Economic development pops in there, which is sort of the flip side, the opposite of managing and slowing growth would be to stimulate more growth. And then streets, sidewalks, and maintenance would be the fourth category. But clearly the first two are growth-related concerns. What characteristics of Missoula do you think need to be preserved to make it the kind of place in which you want to live in the future? Interesting question. The top three responses: open space, environmental preservation, growth management, no urban sprawl, and preserve the small town atmosphere. So clearly people are focused on growth and growth impacts in terms of preserving an area that they want to stay in. Just switching gears, I'm going to show you a couple other areas. This is sort of an interesting survey from Maryland. I grew up in Maryland, and it's one of those states that's kind of a, I think of it as being like an average state. It's like, it wasn't, it was on the Mason-Dixon line. It wasn't really in the North or the South during the Civil War, and it's not really predominantly, Republican or Democrat. It's just kind of one of those states that kind of is an average sort of state. And here they're asked, thinking about the number of people in your region and the state and the impacts on the environment and traffic, what would you say the population is? Too large, just right, too small, or don't know? And I just think this is interesting for a number of reasons. One is that the people that think the population is too small is extremely small. Extremely small. And then you have quite a few people that think the population is just right as it is. And then you have a very large number, in fact a majority, who think the population is too large. And if you look at the people that think it's too large and people that think it's just right, you could characterize this as 97% no growthers. So if you're trying to marginalize people as no growthers, you probably are making a mistake, at least based on this survey. And it was repeated in several other states, this similar survey, and had similar responses. It's actually first done in Oregon. A survey from Portland. Portland's regional government does some good surveying, and I'll give you a couple of their results. This was from 2006, and it's sort of a complex question, but it says over the next 10 years, the population will grow considerably. First of all, do you agree with that? Is that very likely or somewhat likely or not likely? And clearly people think it's very likely or somewhat likely that population will grow considerably over the next 10 years in Portland. Okay. So then the next question is this desirable? And so the desirable is 32% think it's desirable, and 64% think it's undesirable. Gee, 2 to 1 think that the future growth that Portland's going to have is undesirable. Here's a question that Portland Metro did in 2001, but didn't repeat in 2002 for some reason. Perhaps they didn't like the answers. In the next 20 years, do you see the quality of life in the metro area as getting better, staying about the same, or getting worse? Getting worse, 54%. So that doesn't bode well for the great city, the mecca of planning, if 54% of the population thinks things are going to be worse. Another question that they asked in 2001 and didn't ask again is, I think Metro, the regional government, and my local government ought to try to slow growth down. Do you agree, strongly, somewhat, disagree, or strongly disagree? 56% agreed that their local government ought to try to slow growth down. So they should get to it, right? But of course they haven't, as you might guess. And so we tend to see a relationship like this. in public surveys, where the more growth that an area experiences, the more impact people see to quality of life and the less they like the growth. So just my simplistic summary there. I want to discuss the idea of a sustainable growth rate, because this is a topic that gets brought up a lot. What would be a sustainable growth rate? Is there a sustainable growth rate? And often 1% is suggested as maybe that would be a sustainable growth rate. And my response is 1% is a lot better than 2%. And so, it could be a major improvement. But let's go back and look at a scenario here. And this graph shows human population on planet Earth over the past 12,000 years. So we're going back to 10,000 BC, shortly after the Ice Age, where civilizations were just starting to form. And we didn't have a census at the time, so we don't know exactly how many people were there, but the best guess estimate is that in 10,000 BC we had about 4 million people on the planet. 4 million. And today, I have to keep moving this point every time I give a presentation because it seems to be growing so fast, but we're at 6.6 billion today. And so you can see that over this long time span, we've had very dramatic growth over the last couple hundred years. Just very, very dramatic. Unprecedented, it's a bold experiment, I think, and very risky one. But the question that I want to pose to you is, if we go back to 10,000 BC, and we started with just two people, it'd be best if they were a man and a woman, and grew at 1% a year for 12,000 years, what would a population look like today? And I think that initially, first few years, it would be hard growing at 1%, but once we got past that problem, the mathematical problem, and started growing at 1% a year, what would the population look like today if we started with just two people growing at 1% a year? And the answer is that the Earth would be a solid ball of human flesh with a diameter the size of the solar system, which at that time, the time the calculation was done, included Pluto, expanding outward into space at the speed of light. So clearly, we didn't grow at 1% a year over this time period. All right, 1% a year would have been just inconceivable. So we must have grown much slower than that. So what equivalent growth rate would have produced from 4 million people to 6.6 billion people today? And it's 0.06% growth rate is the average annual growth rate that would produce an equivalent amount of growth today. So, and that has produced realistically a very unsustainable population growth and a real population explosion over the last 200 years, even at that rate. So, one thing I just want to introduce is the idea of a doubling time. And if you talk about 1% population growth, you can very quickly calculate a doubling time for any annual percentage growth rate by taking 70 and dividing it by the percentage growth rate. So 70 divided by 1% gives you 70 years. That's the doubling time. So if your community is growing at 1% a year, it will be twice as large in 70 years. So slightly less than a human lifespan, the community will double at 1% a year. So it's not a sustainable growth rate, but it's perhaps a better alternative than what a lot of communities are experiencing, a much faster growth rate. All right, I'm going to talk about politics of urban growth a little bit because it's such an important topic. If you hope to achieve change or reforms or meaningful growth policies, you're going to run up against something called the urban growth machine. This is a little cartoon that I kind of like because this guy is interviewing a woman in her house and asking her if she likes the air and she expects the government to protect the air and the water and the quality of life. Yes, yes, yes. So when did you become anti-business? And I think that this is characterizing how the issues are being portrayed very effectively in a negative context. If you care about these things, you can be portrayed as being anti-business. At any rate, when it comes to land use issues, we tend to see two camps. And this one over here, first of all, the short list is, I put here you and me, neighborhood associations, potentially some charitable foundations, basically the citizenry. And those folks we're here for the long haul. We care about the future. We have kids. We're thinking long term. We like the environment. Quality of life is important to us. Over here, we have another group. And these are largely development-related interests. And I classify them as special interests. But essentially, they make up something that has been called the urban growth machine. And it's a political economic system that benefits directly from urban growth. These businesses see dollars. Growth equals dollars, and growth benefits them directly. So regardless of whether it benefits you, it benefits them, and perhaps they think, therefore, it should benefit you, or just it benefits them, and that's all they need to know. So you end up with some very staunch supporters of growth. Big landowners, real estate developers, mortgage bankers, realtors, construction companies, building contractors, cement, asphalt, sand and gravel, building suppliers, newspapers. Why would newspapers be on that list? Why are newspapers, how do they benefit from growth? Advertising, real estate advertising, how about that? They can get a new store to come to town and get a lot of extra advertising. They can increase circulation. Newspapers are almost always part of this interest group. And so if you have a newspaper, a local newspaper that's doing balanced reporting on urban growth issues, you are extremely fortunate, because most newspapers are simply growth boosters. They see it in their interest to have as much growth as possible. So at any rate, there's a long and formidable list of folks that are very keen on growth. And one of the things that we see is that interest manifests itself in the political process. So this is a rare glimpse into who, in terms of industries, is funding political campaigns. And this data comes from my county, Lane County, Oregon. Because we had the adequate reporting laws, and because the local newspaper sat down and analyzed 5,000 contributions and figured out what those businesses were affiliated with in terms of the type of business, and then reported them. And I took that data and said, my goodness, a number of these businesses need to be grouped into the common category of land development. They're all part of the land development group. And what we see is that of all the spending on local political races, it's just local races, in Lane County over a 5-year period, by far the largest investor in politics is the land development industry. And second was timber companies. And timber companies, of course, produce raw materials for development. So they have very compatible and similar interests. So you have 42% of all contributions to the political process, 42% coming from land development, another 22% in our instance coming from timber. It may be similar here. This is not a unique scenario, except for the fact that we got this timber effect, but it's not at all unique to Lane County. I see this everywhere. And that is that there isn't really, it dwarfs everything else. And you don't really see environmentalists, aren't on here. So, it just dwarfs everything else, is the land development funding of political races. And when you have a system like that, you can pretty well guess it's not going to produce great results when it comes to land issues, when they come before your city council and before your mayor, if this is the kind of funding system that generated their offices, that put them in position, that gave them preference over some more poorly funded candidate. And when you think about it, if you're a developer, many urban land development projects can generate $10 million in profit, $50 million in profit. If you can get the city to annex your property and then provide some services to it, $100 million. If you have that kind of money at stake, with that kind of profit, what would it cost to buy the whole system? You could drop less than $1 million here and buy every single office. Well, you compare that with, say, your marketing budget, or some other budget line that you've got as a business, and you realize that buying the political system in small towns and cities throughout the country is the best value for your buck. If you're in the land development industry, that's the quickest way to riches, is to influence the local political. It's a bargain, okay? You can hardly, there's just absolute fire sale is our local political offices. They're so cheap. This is 5 years of spending in Lane County. Now, I have to tell you, they've gone way up since then. So the race has just escalated way out of control. And it's starting to finally register on people's radar and generate some alarm about the process. So anyway, my conclusion here is that the most powerful political force at the local level in the United States of America is the land development industry. And people don't know this. They just don't. And you may figure it out after a lot of bashing your head against the wall at council meetings and so forth. I'm going to skip this. This is some reactions Americans are catching on to this sort of thing. And talk about Portland's response to this. Portland, a couple years ago, adopted a publicly funded campaign system. The first city in the nation to adopt a 100% publicly funded campaign system for city offices. All city offices now. And the way they did this, they adopted it in 2005, it became effective in 2006. If you want to run for city council, you've got to collect $1,005 donations. So you have to make a serious token effort in order to qualify for the process. Not easy gathering that much, so it's a significant amount of legwork. Once you've done that, you become a genuine candidate and you receive $150,000 to run in the primary race. Boom, you get a check. If someone else in your race outspends you, very quickly they have a process that you can get matching funds to get the exact same amount of money. You get it right away, within a few days. You've got the same amount of money, so you can't be outspent. And it's a voluntary program. Great package. They had a few glitches, and they've been fixing them and fine-tuning it, but it's right there on the website. You can copy every last word of their policies. So, it's something to think about as a city of Missoula to say, why don't we have that? Wouldn't that be a great policy? Why have a political system that's funded by special interests? Why not fund it equally for all legitimate candidates? And I think that the results could be a lot better government in the public interest. All right, I want to talk about planning. This is what I mentioned before about what happens with planning. And the first thing that I think is important to recognize is what planning is. And it's really very simple. And I think sometimes planning is made complex, but realistically, planning is simply a process of achieving our goals. Right? Planning is a process for achieving our goals. Well, the thing that pops out of that is that clearly the goals are important, right? I mean, if your goal is to destroy the world, that's not going to be a good planning process. So goals are what drives the process, should be what drives the process. Goals are important. So let me just give you a little case study here that I am personally familiar with because it was from my home county again, Lane County, Oregon, called the Region 2050 program. And there are a number of good things about this. It was a regional planning effort, and generally I support the idea of regional planning. And it was 2050, it was a long-range planning. So I think long-range planning is a good idea. Regional planning coordination are generally good ideas. They projected 160,000 new people would come in during this planning period. 160,000 new people. So they conduct a series of public involvement processes in which they go around and they say, okay, we've got this growth scenario. How do you want to accommodate it? And they draft up some alternatives. So we have the three alternatives here. And I want to also give them credit for sending this flyer out, which landed in my newspaper and arrived on my doorstep. And presumably everyone that got the newspaper got one of these. So, they made an effort to do public awareness, to go out to community and try to get public involvement. And so we have the three scenarios, and they are compact urban growth, or satellite communities, where we have little spots of growth all over the area, or rural growth, which is effectively sprawl. So kind of more of the same, kind of unrestricted growth. So three scenarios: compact, satellite, or rural growth. And so there are a couple problems start to crop up here. First of all, as a citizen looking at this, I'm wondering which of these scenarios is better than what I have today? Well, really none of them are. So I'm in a process that I'm planning for a future that's not as good as the one I enjoy today. Well, fundamentally, that's a problem. Because as a planner and as a citizen, I want to be planning proactively to make tomorrow better, to make my community better, to improve the quality of life for everyone. And I don't want to plan the gradual demise or degradation or destruction of my community. So right off the bat, I'm looking at these and saying, none of these are planning for a better tomorrow. So it seems to be a choice between the lesser of evils, right? I'm just going to pick the one that's the least worst. So it's not really a very positive, rewarding process. Immediately, I'm turned off by this entire process. The other thing is, well, exactly what are the goals in this process? This is a major planning process. What's driving it? Where are the goals? So I called them and contacted them and found out what the goals are. I said, oh, we've got some goals. They were created by a committee. I said, well, what committee was it? Oh, we put together a team of experts. So long ago, they got together a team of experts, they whipped up some goals and put them in a file folder. And then they looked at the growth scenario here and said, we've got 160,000 people, we're going to have to figure out where to put them. So what just happened there? Something happened, goals in the file cabinet, 160,000 people put up here, and now goal number 1 is accommodating 160,000 people. And that's what we're going to do. So we're going to sit down as a community and have a lot of fun tonight in this work session. We're going to figure out how to squeeze 160,000 people in, and we got 3 ways in which we can do it, and here they are. I'm telling you, citizens are immediately turned off. These are not the kind of options they want, and they're ready to leave. They do the best that they can, maybe sit through one of these sessions, throw up their arms up in the air, and say, they call me, is what they did here, and complain about it. But this process finally came to the forefront, became time for the city councils to start adopting it. They looked at it and they go, I don't know. I don't really think we're going to go for it. One after the other, they said, nope, we're not doing it, and it went in the trash. So 3 years of planning, major regional planning effort, gone. And it's dead, and it's not coming back. So what happened? What goes wrong with the planning process? Growth projections become goals. This is not the way planning was supposed to be done. This is not the way we were taught it in graduate school, okay? Goals come from citizens and elected officials through a process in which we form goals and our priorities for the future. And so growth projections should not be goals. They should inform the process, but the process should be goal-driven. Planning becomes mitigation, right? Instead of planning for a better and brighter future, we're planning to mitigate what we see coming down the pike. This planning is being done for people who don't even live in our community yet. We don't even know what they will want or who they are, but we're going to start laying out streets, carving up land and rezoning it and getting it ready for them. And this pisses a lot of people off because this is a lot of work and money being spent for somebody else. And, we're right here. And it's not making our community any better. We're not seeing our street being enhanced. We're not seeing investment in our existing neighborhoods. Instead, a lot of work is being done to accommodate some future group of people. And most planning that's being done is based on an endless growth model. Okay? So basically what an endless growth model assumes is that we can grow forever. And if we can't grow forever, well, the end of growth is so far away that we don't need to worry about it. We don't need to worry about it now. I think this model is obsolete, okay? It's long past time we started recognizing the need to identify limits to growth and start including in the planning process. So I think any planning process that is based on this endless growth model is an outdated planning process. So we need to start thinking in a different way, and I'll make a couple suggestions here. First of all, base all planning on widely held community goals. If you don't have those goals, let's get a process together and get them, because that's where you need to start. Okay, people say growth is inevitable. No, it's not. Change is inevitable, okay? Change is inevitable. Growth is not. So plan for change. Recognize there are limits to growth. Indeed, there are, and they're fast approaching us, and we need to start including them in the planning process because these planning processes are 20-year, 30-year, 50-year processes, and there are limits in there, and they need to start getting in the plan. And begin using sustainability as a new framework for planning. So sustainability is basically a concept of thinking about the future as though we want to continue to be in it. And so I think that needs to be the basis for our planning from now on. My definition for true sustainability, ideal sustainability, is a human species coexisting in harmony with nature for all time, or for the foreseeable future, if all time is too great. That's the concept that we're striving towards. We want to be here, we want to be in balance with nature, and we want to be able to do it indefinitely, and it applies to all people everywhere. So, one of the things that pops out is, well, what would happen if we had this stable community? I mean, would it be a dull, boring place to live where absolutely nothing changes? Or, could it be a place that's dynamic, diverse, unique, culturally rich, and has a bright future? And I think that we have a lot to learn about this community because we really don't know anything about it. But if we use nature as a model, in nature, the most stable systems are the most complex and most interesting. And I think we could even look at cities and say that, some of the stable cities, nice cities in Italy and Europe, are ones that are the most interesting, diverse, culturally rich kinds of places that haven't changed in 200 years. I like this Gary Larson cartoon. They got this V formation of ducks walking along, and the lead duck looks up and says, "Hey, look what they're doing." And this is, what I think communities need to do. I think communities need to lead by example. And so I want to encourage you as Missoulians to think about providing some of that leadership, because the country really needs it, and there aren't that many communities that are, positioned to provide that kind of leadership. A few potential action items. I'm going to leave you with this, and then I'm going to wrap up. But things you could do: full cost recovery from new growth and development, basically a pay-as-you-grow strategy. And I talked about the costs, and try to recover full costs. Do sustainable community planning. Start incorporating limits to growth in the planning process. Start getting input from people about what they want, what the future is, what they think about in terms of the ultimate build out of their community, how fast do they want the community growth, how much growth do they want. And then restore local democracy. And I say restore it because we really have a system that is heavily corrupted throughout the nation. Try to get back to the idea of real democracy, and campaign finance reform is the best tool we have for that. So 3 big areas that you can work on right now that will have significant benefits, I think, for your community. And I'll just leave you with a quote from Aldo Leopold, who's the founder of the idea of the land ethic that's very important to me. And he said, we abuse land because we regard it as a commodity belonging to us. When we see land as a community to which we belong, we may begin to use it with love and respect. So thank you for having me come here. Thank you very much. So I did run over just a little bit, but I want to entertain questions and comments of any sort here for a while, and so I'll be happy to take them. And I think I don't know whether we need to get someone on a mic, but if they'd like to come up and use the mic, they can, or if they want to stand up and speak loudly, that would be probably a-okay.
It said in the sheet there that you studied what Missoula's doing, so can you comment on that? The planning that we're undergoing right now in the zoning and
Well, Yeah, I can't comment on that to any great length because, you know, I did have a chance to review the documents. Jen did a wonderful job of forwarding me a small mountain of information, of which I tried to review as much of it as I could. So I've had a chance to look at some of the planning process, and I think, you know, the good news is that you're engaged in the planning process. So that's the positive, and your community is trying to do something. You know, I think the thing that I see that I would like to see maybe more of is the public input at the front end of those processes. You know, the goal-driven aspects of it. You know, the issue of growth is not that doesn't seem to be part of that process, and this is very common in city planning programs, county planning programs. Is the first thing that happens is, you know, you walk into this public meeting, it's the first meeting of the whole process, and you're already looking at these three scenarios, and you say, well, what about the issue of growth? How much? You know, I mean, what if we want to have less, or we want to have some policies about it? That is not under consideration. So I think, you know, that issue should be something that's also considered as part of this process, is how much growth, how fast, you know, what's the ultimate vision for the valley here? You know, is there any limit? If there is, do you want to start thinking about it now? Would now be a good time? So that part I didn't see, and I didn't see any of that. So that I'd like to see, you know, that maybe could be another process in addition to the ones that you have. But you know, I see a city that's doing a lot of planning work, and I also see citizens that seem to be very involved in these activities. So there's an engaged community here. So there's a lot of positive things happening. So I think it's encouraging. And then the other thing that's encouraging, of course, is travel around town and see what a great city you have. It's really outstanding. And, you know, I understand you've got a major downtown initiative, but, you know, touring around downtown, I was like, this is great. You've got a great downtown. You're in great shape. So I don't know how radical a transformation you need downtown, because you've got a lot of diversity down there. It's an interesting place. It seems to be doing fairly well, and those are really the qualities that you want. And there are some projects going on right now downtown, and I understand you've got some more in the works. So you know, the prognosis for downtown seems to be excellent. You know, I think part of the planning process is to think about maybe having more people living downtown and how that might occur. And that seems like a good idea too. Yeah.
I understood completely your ideas about sustainability. A lot of information coming through. I try to grasp sustainability and the concept of restoring democracy and campaign finance reform and everything. That sounded really good. But the first item on paying for development and paying for growth. And the first thing that came to my mind was housing affordability. And I'm wondering, I'm trying to put together a connection of slowing or neutrality in growth policy and housing affordability. I mean, my children cannot afford to buy homes here, and I don't even think their children can. So you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, probably really have to talk a lot about that to address that question properly, because affordable housing issue is a pretty tough issue to tackle. We've got a marketplace that has just, you know, boosted the cost of housing nationwide to really unaffordable levels for the nation as a whole. So it's not a unique problem to this area. The real estate bubble just got awfully high, and it's going to make it's creating housing problems nationwide. A lot of people are losing their houses, and so on and so forth. When you talk about, you know, more directly to your question about, you know, paying for the cost of growth, how would that affect housing affordability? What happens is if you don't have a mechanism for paying the cost of growth, you still have to pay those costs, right? Because these aren't optional costs. It's not optional whether you have sewer plant capacity. You've got to have sewer plant capacity. So we're not talking about creating new fees and taxes to charge people for a lot of new la-di-da stuff that's controversial. We're talking about schools. We're talking about having fire stations. These are things that you got to build, okay? So the question is, how should they be paid for? Should, a new subdivision that's going in pay for the new school that it's going to need for the kids that live in the subdivision? Or should the community be asked to pay and help pay for each and every new subdivision that goes in around the community? Well, what happens is if you don't have a mechanism to recover the costs from the development, then everyone pays. And what that means is that buried in the tax that everyone pays are costs to pay for all this infrastructure to serve new growth. So the impact that has is that makes everyone's costs of living, costs of housing. If you're generating your revenues based on property taxes, that most communities are, that means that home ownership is more expensive because you're also subsidizing all the new development that goes in. It means that rental homes are more expensive because they're subsidizing. So if you can offload those costs out of the tax base and put them in impact fees, then you have direct payment. You have a more equitable system, but you also offload that from the tax base. And so in theory, you could have a tax reduction. In practice, you probably get better services. So you're shifting costs. You're not creating new costs. This is really a question of who pays. Now, what does happen is the cost of a new house then goes up. Okay, so those costs typically go into the cost of a new house. The developer may absorb some of those costs, but I say most of them are going to go into the cost of the house. So new housing prices would likely go up. New housing typically represents a small fraction of the total houses on the market at any given time, like about 15%, something like that. So still the majority of houses would be relatively unimpacted by that fee, but it does tend to push the market up. So it can have an effect on housing purchase costs, but your taxes are lower. And if you look at payments, cash flow for a household, it really shouldn't affect that. It just makes it a more equitable funding situation. So it doesn't have the kind of impacts that I think it's often portrayed as having. It's really a question of equity. Who should be paying for it? And so I think that's the primary issue. And there are a lot more affordable housing issues other than those. But I'll just make one other statement there regarding affordable housing, and that is, it's really largely a manifestation of how desirable your community is. And to just really simplify this, if you have a community that is a terrible place to live, it's just absolutely horrible, do you think housing will be expensive there? How do you know? You just do, right? And if you have a community that is a wonderful place to live, has a great quality of life, has great school systems, lots of high-paying jobs, beautiful environment, lots of recreational opportunities, will housing be cheap there? And so you just already know the answer to this housing affordability issue. It has to do with the demand for the community, how desirable your community is. And if you make your community desirable, that old catch-22 applies, and you get growth pressure. People want to live there, and they'll bid up housing prices. It's just the marketplace, but I see the blame being placed for this on a lot of other things where it doesn't belong. If you have a great community, people are going to want to live there, and they're going to push housing prices up. If you want to get them down, you can make your community a really lousy place to live. And that's, that is, when you're working in a market, this kind of system we have, it's an open market, that's the kind of pricing system we have.
Well, other than reducing the desirability of the community as a place to live, how do you imagine building limits into planning?
Building, what kind of limits are you thinking of in terms of population growth or something?
I don't know, I guess I tracked on suggestions 1 and 3, but I'm a little vague on 2.
I mean, there are quite a few communities are looking at identifying various types of limits, but one might be in terms of physical constraints. We don't want to have a footprint that's any larger than such and such a footprint. We don't want to have a rate of growth that's greater than such and such a rate, because we find that growing more slowly, we can plan better and grow better and those sorts of things, because we can manage it more effectively than we could if it was 5% growth or whatever. So there are really quite a range of possibilities, and California continues to lead the country in terms of doing this kind of planning. It's fairly routine in California to have build-out, the concept of build-out built in to the comprehensive plan. So they put together a comprehensive plan, and they have the ultimate build-out, which they know. And at that point, the community will be full. I mean, if you take this idea to other areas, people go, what? In California, it's like everyone goes, oh yeah, that's the way we do it. And so, you know, these things are happening and they're being done in other parts of the country, and in bits and pieces sometimes, but they're all available to incorporate in any plan that you're working on here. Let me get this back here. Go, okay, you're deferring, and then I'll get this gentleman right there.
You mentioned you like regional planning. I was just thinking if we plan regionally, whether that be western Montana or a certain area around Missoula, to make certain communities more attractive for people to live in, then they would take the pressure off of everybody trying to go here. I mean, I heard 100,000 people in the next 50 years or something. And I totally agree with your analysis and your values. I was wondering what you meant by regional planning.
Okay, well, generally I advocate that every community make itself as great a community as it possibly can be. So I'm not just singling out any one community or really suggesting that people try to make their communities bad places to live. But then as far as regional planning goes, I think there's a lot of different potential regions. So you've got your city, your immediate region, maybe your county, maybe a multi-county area, maybe a geographic district, the mountain district or the, you know, whatever. And then you've got, you know, potentially a state and potentially multi-state areas. And then you really even got the nation, and you've got the world. And it really makes sense to be planning on all levels. And so I don't think there's any, you know, one region that is the region that you need to be thinking about. But you know, you can look at an impact area in terms of planning, where you're seeing impacts coming from. But, you know, I was, you know, noticing license plates today, and I noticed license plates from every place. I mean, you know, there was Illinois, there was Arizona, there was Pennsylvania. People are coming from everywhere here. So I don't know what your, you know, your impact area in terms of regional planning is. Could be fairly large. But generally regional planning, a lot of different levels, and we really need to be doing it at many levels. And we really ought to have, you know, a national planning program. We don't have that. It was something Al Gore was talking about when he was running for office, and one of the reasons I was very enthusiastic about his presidency, but didn't happen. He read my book, by the way, or claimed he did. He probably, yeah.
On your graph that showed the growth rate in many communities versus increase in per capita population. It's a good chart. You had some communities that had low growth, no growth, or even some negative growth.
And still had income growth.
And yet they had pretty good per capita income.
Mm-hmm.
What are they doing in those places? Industrial base and shape.
Okay, that would be phase 2 of the study, which never happened. You know, there are a lot of interesting questions just like that one, okay, that I think really warrant analysis. I really do. Unfortunately, you don't see that analysis being done. And this upsets me a great deal because, you know, growth is one of these things that impacts us tremendously. And, you know, ironically, we know more about western tree frogs than we know about growth and how it affects communities. And I'm not even exaggerating. It's just true. So we really haven't invested the research in this stuff. So the things that we don't know, it's astonishing how much there is that we don't know. So I like to see a lot more research done. I tried to start a nonprofit research organization, and you know, my timing was probably bad because of the market situation, but I was not able to get $1 from a foundation to do growth research, growth impact research. It was just not on the radar of any foundations. This is 5 years ago. Maybe that's changing because there's a lot we don't understand. There's a lot more information we could get that I think would really benefit decision making, because we're not making real quality decisions. Even the most basic and fundamental stuff that I looked at, in many cases, was completely wrong. The presumptions we had about the issue were completely wrong. So we need more quality information on broad spectrum of areas about how growth is impacting our communities today. It will help us a great deal, and I don't happen to see any particular path to that. But if you happen to know about any funding sources, let me know, because I have a research agenda that I would like to launch to gather this kind of data. And I'm not talking about, you know, partisan or one side or the other. I'm just talking about generating quality data so we can understand these growth impacts a little better and help guide our decision making. Okay, anybody else? Let me just go right across the room here. Start with you, and I'll get you next.
I'm wondering where the Portland County Finance campaign gets the money to to fund a candidate once they qualify for $1,500.
Once they qualify and they get the $150,000 check, I should know that because I have known that, but I've forgotten where that money comes from.
It's bound to be taxed.
What's that?
It's bound to be taxed.
They have a special source of revenue for it, and I'm sure you can find that on the Portland City website, but I'm afraid I don't recollect where it does come from. It's not a great deal of money. All total, it's not a great deal of money when you look at the city budget. What you have to consider is that those people that you hire or elect are presiding over hundreds of millions of dollars. And would it not be worth $500,000 to help get the best candidates in there, to dispense with hundreds of millions of dollars in taxes every year? That's the kind of decision making that you're engaged in, and I think it's it's kind of like a business that wants to get a new CEO. Are they just going to take whoever happens to come in the door, or are they going to do an exhaustive process in which they qualify the candidates? And I think you invest in good leadership, and I think that's partly what Portland has decided to do. Yeah, I think it's a very small amount of money relative to the amount that's at stake. I mentioned the kind of profits developers make. City councils make $10 million decisions all the time. And so, boom, there's another $10 million decision just made. And, to think that you wouldn't spend $500,000 to get the best possible people in there to make those $10 million decisions that they're making, every other week, doesn't make good sense to me. Those are really important, and the savings that you can get in good, careful, thoughtful decision-making process that you're likely to get out of those candidates, those city councilors that are directly accountable to the voters, more accountable to the voters, is well worth it. I think you just get your money back in a matter of months in terms of savings, efficiency, quality of decision-making. That's just my personal opinion, but that's why I would support it. Okay, and yes.
We have been affected in the last 10 years by an attitude of infill, which means subdividing within the city on existing lots, making arrangements in zoning and so on. What is your general attitude about infill?
Okay, well, I'm stepping out on the thin ice here. I have mixed feelings about infill, okay? I think that we're at the point, as I mentioned, with the land supply, or impact on the landscape, that we need to use land efficiently. We don't need to be squandering or wasting land. We need to use it very efficiently. We have a lot of land that's already been impacted by urban development that is in many cases in terrible shape, underutilized. That property can be redeveloped. So typically cities have a lot of redevelopment opportunities. I didn't see as many in Missoula as I expected to turning around the city. City's in pretty good shape. Land is being pretty well utilized. In Eugene, we have a lot of redevelopment opportunities. As far as infill in neighborhoods that are healthy, well-established, mature, full neighborhoods, that's where you start to get into serious problems because you try to change the character of an established neighborhood, and you can seriously impact people. You can cause property values to decline. You can impact people so seriously that they have to sell their house at a loss and move away. And this happens a lot. So this idea of infill has to be done in a sensitive manner, has to be very selective, but there are ways to do that. I see some planners going like, I don't have any idea, how this could possibly be done. It can be done in a thoughtful way in which impacts are, there's a process for addressing impacts. If there are impacts, evaluate them and determine whether the project should go forward or not. So you need some sort of criteria and some sort of selective process that allows infill to be done carefully in a compatible manner, because there's kind of incompatibilities that can generate when you have a single-family housing neighborhood that's well established, and then you want to put in a bunch of garden apartments right in the middle of the darn thing, and people are going, what are you doing? You know, my backyard is gone now. You know, I have people staring in my bedroom window. You know, my house is not worth anything near what it was previously. Those are takings. You know, you talk about property takings. Those become de facto takings of all the surrounding neighborhoods. So that kind of stuff is a real impact, and needs to be. You need to anticipate that sort of thing. Otherwise, you know, using land more intensively, I think, is something we really have to do, because generally as a goal, we need to keep the urban footprint as small as possible, because we need all our farmland, as I pointed out, but we also need our forest land, because fiber, there's a global shortage of fiber. Those forests are valuable. If, you know, for making paper and every other construction materials and everything else we need it for. So we really need all our land. So we really, and nature and wildlife and species diversity also need some of that land. So we really need to minimize our urban footprint. So it means where we are going to have additional growth in the future, and in many cases it is inevitable in the short term that we are going to have more growth, recognizing that we need to try to accommodate in the least impactful manner. So, long answer to your question. Yeah.
I really enjoyed the presentation, but I'm still bothered by the underlying arithmetic. We're growing at 0.6%, which is clearly unsustainable.
No, 0.06% is what the equivalent growth rate would have been.
And so, let's say we as a community say that to keep our community great, 0.01% is the appropriate growth. Where do the other people being born go?
Well, I think that, you know, what you're suggesting is that that with our local policy, you know, that we should be accountable for all the policies that are going on throughout the world.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the planning is stuck because the basic arithmetic is out of balance. And if we came up like Tahoe did years ago, they said, okay, we're going to restrict growth by only allowing so many water meters to be permitted per year. That worked for a little while, but cost of property went through the sky. People with really big money bought up the water meters. Not houses, they bought up water meters. It became a commodity. Or if we did some other mechanism, it doesn't matter what the mechanism is, eventually that marginal difference in people goes somewhere. And if we should restrict our community to X number of people, and that we get near that border, how do we then decide which people are allowed to live in our community?
Well, I think, you know, what you're asking is not a simple question. It's actually, you know, very complex question. There's a lot of different elements to it. Let's see. You know, first of all, the United States is really, our indigenous population is about at replacement levels. So we're, you know, just a little over 2 children per woman in the United States. So most of our growth, 82% of our future growth between now and 2050 is coming from immigration, foreign people coming into the United States. So really our indigenous population is very close to being a stable population. And I do think that communities have a responsibility to accommodate their own growth. But do they have an obligation to accommodate growth from elsewhere? And I don't see that they necessarily do. I don't feel that there is that obligation. But I think, you know, each person can make their own decision about it. I'm not suggesting that has to be you know, the way that you feel about it. But I think that growth rate is actually very small. And what we've done as a nation is build houses to accommodate expanding needs, not expanding population. So we've really built a tremendous number of houses as second homes and third homes. And that has really boosted and sustained this development and construction that we've had over the last 10 years. It's basically been for extra housing. And the result is that today, we not only have a drop in demand for new houses, we have an oversupply of existing houses. And we have a bunch of people who are trying to divest themselves of their second home, which will then become more oversupply. And so we essentially are in a situation in which we're overbuilt across this country, and it's probably going to take a couple of years, and maybe 5 years, and maybe even longer to absorb all the housing that we've built. So we've got an overbuilt situation. It's not a situation of, where are we going to put people? We have a lot of housing. The affordability issue is still, a critical problem. But we have a glut of housing available in the United States, and I expect the situation to continue to be bad for some time. So that only answers your question in a couple different ways, but it is a complex question. I think the other part of it is can you plan for your community if it means that maybe people would go somewhere else instead. This is something that bothers people, and I think that my feeling about it is that you have to be able to plan for your community, because you can't plan for the whole world. You can't make decisions for the whole world. You can't adopt policies for the whole world. All you can do is work with what you got in your community. And so you make good decisions in your community. You develop good plans and perhaps good growth controls in your community. And if they're working great in your community, every other community can copy you. So, the fact that they're going to go somewhere else, well, they're going to go somewhere else because they didn't do anything in the other community. They didn't care enough to take action, or they didn't copy your policies. So I don't think it's quite as reckless as it's portrayed as. I think that basically people have to be empowered to take action in their community. You can't say, well, you can't do anything in our town because, India is growing. There's nothing you can do about India. You need to be able to say, we'd like to have our town have a long-range prospect for the future, or have a high quality of life, to maintain its scenic vistas, environmental quality, access to nature, recreational opportunities, great education, and quality jobs for the people that live here today. So, those kinds of things are possible to pursue. You cannot solve the problems of all of Montana or the West or the United States of America. It's unrealistic, and you just can't do that. So you have to be focused on what you're doing, and if it has some spillover impacts, sure, try to address them, but that can't be the reason why you don't do anything. It's not an adequate reason to not take action. So anyway, a couple last questions, and I think we should probably wrap it up. How about these two, and then we'll adjourn, if that's okay. That sound all right? All right. Yeah. This gentleman here, and then I'll get you.
I work for the Carpenters Union, and you forgot to put us on the left side.
Sorry about that.
And I have a responsibility to over 250 people to keep them working.
Yeah.
They built it, okay? And up until tonight, I looked at development as necessary to keep those wages and benefits coming in. I'm trying to envision now a way that we can use development to promote the change we're supposed to be
Right.
planning on. By the way, I don't know how you plan for change. It seems like it happens 2 years. 2 years ago, nobody thought we'd be paying $4 for gas.
Right.
But that's going to be creating huge changes in this Five Valley area.
Yeah.
How do we predict them, plan for them, and then how do we use development to move towards the changes we're planning on?
Well, we can anticipate and plan for a lot of change, and you mentioned gas prices or climate change. That's something else that we need to be planning for. As far as construction employment, that really seriously concerns me, because I think that story has not been written in the press, in the national press, because there are millions of construction workers who are unemployed right now. And they're collecting unemployment benefits, hopefully, but they're going to be completely unemployed soon. And what are they going to do? I mean, I think it's a national crisis. Do you have a feeling about that? Is it as serious as I think it is?
Tomorrow I could put them to work.
Well, I just, the cutbacks in construction have been tremendous, unprecedented, in terms of the rate of decline in construction industry. So those people are out of work right now. And I think it's a serious problem. We hitched our economic horse on home construction for the last 10 years, or carriage. And that really supported and buoyed the economy over the last 10 years, and that has just been pulled out from under us. So I think there's a serious concern about, what that industry is doing and how we're going to address employment for that group of people. I think, the one bright side is that there is a lot of redevelopment activity going on. And, if you're a contractor, the first thing you want to do right now is get into remodeling, because there's still active remodeling business, and a lot of remodeling needs to be done. So there's an opportunity, and that's remodeling and redevelopment of the community, and so hopefully a lot of people are able to make that transition. But I have not seen the news, and it really does concern me about the amount of unemployment that's going to occur in that sector. And then, yeah.
Now, how do you measure growth? Some people say building permits, other people say bodies.
Yeah, I actually used to start off talks, defining growth, because it's not completely clear when you talk about growth what it is you're talking about, and there are a lot of kinds of growth. It could be personal growth, or whatever, spiritual growth, or a lot of different economic growth versus. But I'm generally referring to growth in population or growth in the built environment. So increasing housing or population. I tend to lump those two together. They're very, very tied in together. And economic growth is not what I'm talking about when I talk about growth. Economic growth, is, as I indicated, is not necessarily connected. I think there is a relationship, but it's not a strong, clear relationship. And so it is possible to have economic growth without population growth or growth in the built environment. And that's part of what that slide is illustrating, and that's the intriguing question that then leads to the possibility of doing some future research, but we don't really know much about that at this point. So,
do you use census numbers?
What's that?
Do you use the census?
I use the census a lot. The census is the best data we have for the most part on the United States and what's going on, but it's from 2000, and it's starting to get kind of old right now in 2008. So we're very eager to see what the next census looks like. And in the meantime, they do estimates between years, and the estimates are, much poorer quality data than the decennial census, which gives us very good data. Census officials go out and knock on doors, interview people, fill out forms, and you get real data. So we really don't have anything good until the next 10-year census. But I'd like to get some research dollars in anticipation of the 2010 census so we could do something with that information, because I think there'll be a lot of interesting results. All right, should we maybe wrap it up? Yeah, and I'll stick around if you want to come up and ask me some questions, but we should probably adjourn. Yeah. Thanks a lot.